Thank you very much. I hope everybody hear me okay? I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that as a yes. Um, well, good morning, everybody, and it's really my pleasure to be here. As Mr. and Mrs. Dobrin will let you know, I've known him for a very long time, and when Mr. Dobrin, and I'm going to call him Mr. Dobrin because I've known him since I was in high school. So, um, when he asked me to do this presentation, I absolutely said yes. Eric, who actually technically was the first assistant coach I ever had as a head coach. He initially called me, and then I got his dad's number, and he asked me to do this presentation. And there's no way I could tell the Dobrins no. Um, as I reminded my brother, I call him Colin, but Michael, I was like, we were talking about how many days we spent over the Dobrin's house, and I'm sure Mrs. Dobrin cooked us more than a few meals. So this is my way of closing the tab with the Dobrin house. So, but again, pleasure to be here. As Mr. Dobrin mentioned, I started at Westbury High School as the junior varsity coach, head coach, and assistant coach on that varsity team with Martin Reed, our varsity basketball coach. And then from there, I got a chance to get into the college ranks. I worked at CW Post for a year. And then I was fortunate enough to get a graduate assistantship at the University of Southern California, working for George Raveling. That was 89-90. From there, I made my way back to the East Coast, worked at Fordham University as an assistant, Villanova University as an assistant. And then I got my break to be a head coach in 1997, be the head coach at Siena College up in Albany, New York. And, when I got into the business of coaching, I thought I was going to be a high school basketball coach, high school guidance counselor. I thought that was a cool existence and try to impact the lives of young people. But one thing led to another, and I just kept moving up, and then got the job at Georgia Tech, where I was there for 11 years down in Atlanta, Georgia. And that was really interesting, being in the Southeast for the first time. I thought in the North we were crazy about sports, but it's a different level down in the Southeast. And, I learned an awful lot about competitive spirit and how much really a community can get totally enveloped in the success and sometimes failure of a sports team, whether it's college or pros. And then after Georgia Tech, went to George Mason. And then I became a scout for the Los Angeles Clippers in 2016. I still hold those duties as a scout, but in 2020, they asked me to coach our G League team on a part-time basis. And then the following year, they asked me to do it full-time. So I'm entering technically my third year coaching the G League team. So between scouting and coaching, I stay pretty busy around the game, and I absolutely love it. There's nothing else I could imagine. If you came back to me when I first met the Dobrin family and Eric, and they said to me, okay, you could spend a lifetime being involved in the game of basketball, earn a pretty good living with it. I would have, first of all, I would have looked around and see where the cameras were, see if it was candid camera going on. But nothing, could have come close to the dreams I had that what I'm actually experiencing right now. I mentioned the idea of being around the Dobrin house and, being involved with sports. One of the things that Eric and my brother Colin and Anthony Turan and Woody and a bunch of our guys we used to hang out with in high school, and we still remain friends to this day. We have a group chat where we commiserate about when the Yankees aren't doing well, and it's noticeably quiet when they're doing well. So I guess that's a sign of we're getting old and cranky in our days here. But I remember one instance being at the Dobrin house, and Eric, you'll probably remember this. We had started a little computer baseball league. And I remember being at your house, and we were getting ready to start the draft, and the phone in your house rings. And of course, back then, no cell phones, the house phone rings. And it's my girlfriend at the time, Dawnette Wilson. And so I think Mrs. Dobrin answered the phone, and she yells upstairs. And, I get on the phone, and apparently she was out with a bunch of her friends for a happy hour, and she didn't feel comfortable driving home. And the draft is about to start. And you got to understand now, like, we take our sport seriously. And I remember having to make the decision: do I leave this draft? Because I know Eric is competitive, my brother's competitive, Anthony's competitive. They're not going to draft me good players to go pick up my then girlfriend, or do I stay here because I want to win this league? And I guess at that time I realized when I went to go pick her up, I said, maybe I'm in love with this girl, And so we ended up getting married. We have 3 lovely daughters who are now college graduates. So I guess I could say the first time I realized I was in love, I was at the Dobrin house. So, but again, it's great to be here to talk about ethics in sports. And I had to actually call Mr. Dobrin back after I started trying to put this talk together. And I said to myself, you know, this is in society, we look at ethics in sports as the ultimate oxymoron. You know, the cynic in society, or the cynic in us, really will remember the stories where unethical behavior, cheating, happens in sports. If you're a baseball fan, and particularly if you're a Yankee fan like I am, and Eric, we're going to remember that the Houston Astros are known for winning the World Series because they cheated. They employed a very elaborate scheme where they could steal the sign that the catcher was relaying to the pitcher, so they knew what pitch was coming. Most of that season, and ended up beating our Yankees in the American League Conference, American League Championship Series. They went on to the World Series and won the World Series that year. And the result of that was, after an extensive investigation, the manager for the Houston Astros was released, the general manager was released, and then there was a coach who had just recently been named the manager of the New York Mets who had their offer rescinded because of that cheating scandal. Even when I was home, I was up in New York for the Labor Day weekend, and I took my daughter Olivia and Darnett and we went to a Yankee game, and the Yankees were playing the Minnesota Twins. Just to show you how sports fans don't forget, the shortstop for the Twins now was a young man named Carlos Correa, who actually played on those Houston Astro teams. And he comes to bat the first time, and the entire stadium starts booing. And my daughter looks at me, she goes, "The game just started, why are they booing?" I said, "It's a long story, babe." But again, the Yankee fans remembered that scandal, and they'll never, ever let them forget it. So again, like I said, the cynic in us will always remember the cheating scandals. If you're a football fan, I'm sure the Tom Brady Deflategate scandal stays in mind. And so people who are not fans of the New England Patriots, who Tom Brady was playing for at the time, today he plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, will always try to detract from his great accomplishments, winning 7 Super Bowls and having, you know, basically established himself as probably the greatest football player in American football history. But they're always going to point to the Deflategate, and not to mention what goes on every day in sports. In my sport of basketball, it's an art form to trick the referee into thinking you've been fouled. Just like in soccer, you have the flopping and the faking of drawing fouls, and or trying to bait an opponent into doing some sort of emotional outburst to get them ejected from the game. So there's a lot of incentive to do what Al Davis, the former owner, the late owner of the Los Angeles Raiders, Oakland Raiders, now the Las Vegas Raiders, he had a very famous saying, "Just win, baby." That was all he worried about. And then there's Leo DeRocha, who always said, "Nice guys finish last," meaning you do whatever you have to do to win. And then there's one other statement that's unknown. I'm sure you've heard it all, but first time I heard it was I went down to the South and talking about college football, and they said, "If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying." So when you hear all those things and you see the rewards from winning, sometimes financial rewards, oftentimes it's just the thrill of victory, the feeling that, hey, I was better than my opponent. There's a lot of incentive there to do unethical things to achieve just the ability of winning. And the interesting thing to me when it comes to that is most people don't have a financial motive, or they don't benefit financially from winning. It's just that, I don't know what it is, that drive, that urge, that wanting to be better than the competition. And I can tell you personally, from being around the sport of basketball and being an avid sports fan, from everything from horse racing to hockey to, you know, as you know, basketball, it's my belief a lot of the unethical behavior, or the pervasiveness of that unethical behavior, is largely apocryphal. I've been around it for 43 of the last 44 years. I've either played, coached, or announced college basketball. And I really truly believe that the overwhelming majority of the competitors are doing it the right way. They try hard to prepare properly, compete honestly, compete with great sportsmanship, compete with great respect for their opponent. As Mr. Dobrin mentioned, I'm in Las Vegas. I'm here. We have our coaches retreat as we get ready to start training camp for the upcoming season. We play our first game October the 20th. The NBA team plays their first game October 20th. So we get away just to kind of strategize and talk about what we can prepare for the upcoming season. But while I was here, our head coach, Tyronn Lue, was nice enough to buy the entire coaching staff tickets to the Canelo Alvarez, Triple G, Gennady Golovkin fight last night. So I went to the fight last night. It was a 12-round fight. It was a great fight. Both were competing at a high level. They both competed honorably. It was a very clean fight. And as always, I'm not surprised, but it's a reminder to me at the end of the fight, here are the two guys trying to knock each other's heads off. At the very end of the fight, they embraced and they both congratulated and both complimented each other. And so there at the end of the fight, it reminded me again why sports are great for society. When you compete with somebody on an honest level, you compete hard, you try to win, even in a sport as brutal as boxing, where obviously the ultimate goal is to knock somebody unconscious. Here are two men standing in the middle of the ring after going 12 hard rounds. They hugged, they embraced, they congratulated each other. And then even in the post-fight interview, I stayed for the post-fight interview, they could not have been more complimentary of one another. There's an empathy, there's a respect, a mutual respect that sports builds that I really believe nowhere else in our society do you get that. I honestly believe that. You go from one switch where you're competitive, you want to win, and then as soon as the bell rings, there are these two guys could not be more loving to each other, more supportive of each other. Anywhere you look, I think you can go through all the positives that sports brings to the competitors, brings to the coaches, and brings to our society. I was in 2004, I was fortunate enough to coach our team that went to the national championship game. We played for the NCAA Division I championship. It's typically the first Monday night in April, and it's the biggest night of the college basketball season. We played the University of Connecticut that night. And of course, with that came along some notoriety, and I was invited to speak at a lot of different places. And one of the places I was invited to was to go to Chicago for the Operation Push, Jesse Jackson's organization. They had their big, I don't want to say gala, but there was a big gathering in Chicago. I think it was in July, early July. And I sat there listening to the speakers who are well-intended, and they were talking about the things they have to do to uplift the Black community and the disadvantaged community, underrepresented community. And they got into high school, talking about high school grades, and they got into high school sports. And one of the speakers sat there, started talking about how kids have to start playing less sports and concentrating on their books. And I was, it was everything I had not to jump up and grab the microphone and said, you're wrong, because if you care to, you can just get on Google and read studies that will unequivocally state that student athletes in high school tend to do better academically, particularly when they come from disadvantaged communities. In particular, in the Black community, with women, sports has an unbelievably positive effect. A greater percentage of student athletes go off to college. A greater percentage of student athletes, they have better grades. A greater percentage of student athletes in terms of women are less likely to become pregnant during their teenage years. Obviously, the opportunities for scholarship dollars to help provide the funds needed to pay for a college education, as we all know. I know, just as, again, I mentioned at the very start, all three of my daughters graduated. They graduated from Georgetown University. And I just wish they'd give me a brick or something to signify how much money my wife and I gave to Georgetown in terms of tuition and fees payments. But, there's this mythology that sports is this great drag on young people and how it pulls them down academically and it pulls them down socially, and nothing could be further from the truth. Even in college, when I was a college basketball coach, I was on quite a few committees, and I can remember talking to some really intelligent professors about the graduation rates of student athletes. And one of the big things that was a major issue in college sports, as long as I've been involved, and even prior to me being involved, was the graduation rates, especially in men's college basketball and football. And yes, the graduation rates can always be better. And yes, kids can take advantage of the opportunity to get a free education at a greater rate. The reality is with the money that's being offered to play professional sports, sometimes there can be some distractions. Sometimes there can be some a lack of motivation to staying with and finishing your college education during those years between 18 and 22. That time will be interrupted by players going pro early. I've had a couple of young men, Chris Bosh in particular, who had the pleasure of seeing last year get inducted to the Basketball Hall of Fame. He left Georgia Tech after his freshman season, but he went on to make over $250 million as a professional player. Very, very bright young man. Came to Georgia Tech because he's interested in computer graphics, computer engineering. But when these type of money are offered to you to play sports professionally, it's really hard to turn down. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when you look at the graduation rates of Black student athletes and women, they tend to do better than the group they come from if they don't play sports. And yes, again, the rates can be better, and there are a lot of reasons we can get into that. I'd be more than happy to answer questions later on. But again, this is another very important byproduct of sports, how it helps kids get them on track. And part of the reasons that they're more likely, kids who play sports are more likely to have mentors and role models in their lives that can help them move along the path. The other thing it really does for them is they will end up having teammates, or like even for somebody like myself and Eric and Mrs. Dober, and Eric's gonna be 56 this year. He's the same age as my brother. Okay. You end up with these lifelong friendships when, you've spent time in practice with each other, talking about a game after the game, or some of my most vivid memories of being a high school coach is, being in the locker room before the game, talking to your team before you go out to compete. Those are friendships and bonds that are never ever broken. Even when I come back to New York for visits, two of my daughters live in Brooklyn. The first thing I do when I land in LaGuardia, I get the rental car, I drive out to Westbury, I go to Post Avenue, and I go to Gino's Pizza, or it used to be Frank's, it's no longer there, but go to Gino's and get a slice of pizza. And I always drive by Baldwin Drive where I live. I always drive by, there's a lot at the end of Baldwin Drive where we literally used to play pickup baseball games. And I remember all those guys that played in those games just like yesterday. And so again, I just think that there's so many positives that come out of being involved in sports, and I could spend the rest of the morning going through them. But I encourage you all to, if you don't already, take a look at how important or how much of a positive, whether it's your grandchildren, your children, or friends, what it can do for them if they get involved. And I don't care what it is, if it's swimming, if it's basketball, if it's field hockey, there are just so many good things that can come from it. What I will tell you, resist the urge to second guess the coach, because it's there, and that's one of the negative things. Even in my own family, my middle daughter, Danielle, who is extremely, extremely bright, she played high school basketball, and she was, let's just say she was okay. Dawnette and I went to a game, I think it was her senior year, and she wasn't getting a lot of playing time, but Danielle was fine. She just wanted to be a part of the team. And we're driving home, and Dawnette's like giving me an earful about how the coach should be doing this for Danielle and coach should be doing that. I finally pulled over, stopped the car, and said, "Are you crazy? I love my daughter, but she's terrible. She can't play. She should be happy she's on the team." So if you do encourage your grandchildren or children or friends or whatever to get involved in sports, leave the coaches alone. I promise you, it's the right thing. But when we look at sports at a larger level, and what it does for the world, sports to me has always provided the impetus, the spark for, and set an example that when we follow their example, good things can happen. Again, all it can do is provide the impetus. All it can do is provide the spark. Just recently, when I say recently, in March of 2020, I remember being here in Las Vegas. Actually, I was on a scouting assignment for our team, the Clippers. I was here for the Pacific 12 Conference Tournament when I got the text message from my front office that, okay, everybody go home. This is March 10th or 11th. We're shutting down. The pandemic is hit the NBA, and we're gonna lead the way. The NBA didn't wait for the federal government. The NBA didn't wait for the municipalities, the cities that the teams belong to. Commissioner Silver and the rest of the NBA owners got together and said, hey, listen, until we know what's going on with this pandemic, we're not going to put our players in harm's way. And at that point, that day, I remember Rudy Gobert, who at that time played for the Utah Jazz, had tested positive for COVID-19. And Commissioner Silver at that time said, oh, look, let's shut it down. So the NBA led the way to the shutdown. And I don't care what anybody wants to say about what their feelings about the shutdown and all that. We knew we were dealing with something that we didn't understand. And until the medical experts got a grasp of it, it was the prudent thing to do to step back, pause, and try to figure it out. So again, here's the NBA. They led the way. And then right after that, everybody fell in line. The NCAA shut down the NCAA tournament. Major League Baseball shut down. And then you saw the government, the political bodies start to fall in line and said, listen, until we know what's going down, let's have this pause. Let's do what we can do to figure this out to avoid, quite a few casualties. And unfortunately, we did lose in this country 1 million people, and worldwide, I think there's over 6 million people died from the pandemic. But I wonder, I'm glad we don't have an answer. What would have happened if the NBA didn't lead the way and say, hey, listen, we are a multi-billion-dollar organization, but we have to take the right thing, do the social responsible thing. I remember late Commissioner David Stern. I had the fortune of sitting in a meeting with him one time. We were talking about the age limit, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but basically, he felt like the NBA had to have a limit where at a baseline age where you're allowed to come into the NBA. He did not want high school players coming straight from high school to the NBA. And the term that Commissioner Stern kept using was, we have a social responsibility. We have a social responsibility not to have some 8th grader tell his biology teacher or his math teacher, I don't need this because I'm going to play in the NBA one day, because the percentage of the opportunity to play in the NBA is, 0.5% of a high school kid or a kid that's in 8th grade is going to end up making to the NBA. And making is one thing, but being able to have a career that can sustain you financially is a whole nother, there's a whole nother set of statistics that say that you're very unlikely. So the sports, like I said, sports have always, to me, provided a spark. They provided the impetus. In 2000 and later that year, in 2020, there was a shooting of Jacob Blake by a Milwaukee police officer, Kenosha, Wisconsin police officer. And at that point, we had just restarted the NBA season because of the pandemic. And the Milwaukee Bucks decided, hey, listen, we've got to take a pause here. Everybody knew there was the issue of police brutality in the Black community had become louder and louder, and everybody was talking about it. It started with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee in a football game to, again, bring attention to issues of systemic racism, in particular in the criminal justice system. And when the shooting of Jacob Blake happened, the Milwaukee Bucks, who at that time were competing for an NBA championship, decided to step back and pause. And again, doing the socially responsible thing for all of us to step back and try to examine, to find out what can we do to first learn more about this issue, and then whatever we discover, let's try to do what we can to correct and make society better moving forward. And there's so many athletes over the years that have done that. My favorite athlete growing up was Muhammad Ali, and he was one of the first ones to speak out against the Vietnam War, and he did it in a respectful manner. People realize how great a fighter he was, but I'm not sure people really, maybe we lose track of or we forget the great sacrifice he made financially to stop boxing, and went 4 to 5 years with no earnings just to make a point about the Vietnam War and his beliefs as a Muslim to not fight in a war. And then, of course, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, their stand in the Olympic Games in 1968. But to me, when you look at American society and American culture, I don't think anybody, and I'd be open to debate, I don't think anyone moved this country forward more than the great Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson was, as we all know, a baseball player for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he, let me just play a couple of videos here, just to kind of give you an idea of what was being said during that time. Just bear with me.
It was a day when somehow people knew, thoughtful people, educated people, Hey,
Everybody hear that?
it's not just whites playing a game on a diamond anymore. Forget the architecture so regaled by baseball writers. Suddenly, it was a new beginning.
So Jackie Robinson obviously was signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1945 and played his first game April 15th, 1947, to break the color barrier. And that started, in my mind, the movement. And when I read back in history, that started the movement for the civil rights movement. It started to move things forward. There are a lot of things that motivate people to do things. Some of it financial, some of it, due to, examples that are set by other people. But regardless, when Jack Robinson broke the color barrier, people started to think differently. Leo DeRocher, who was the manager of the Dodgers at the time, he had a different take on it. And oftentimes, again, I say sports has a way of providing a spark, really creating an impetus for change. And here's a clip from Leo DeRocher.
And I said, I don't know about any petition, but they tell me you got one up. And I don't know about any petition, but I'll tell you what you can do with it. Because Robinson's going to play on this ball club. Because I don't look at the color. I don't care whether he's green, black, yellow, white. He has talent. And he will put money in your pocket and my pocket. This is some kind of player. And he's going to be here. And I'm warning you now that he's only the first of many to follow.
I'm a bit of a novice with this thing here, so bear with me here. But again, you see there, again, the impact of sports, whether it's you want to do the right thing because it's simply the right thing to do, or there's a financial motive. It's going to do something to move society forward. There's something that I experienced personally watching the power of sports. When we made that run to the Final Four in 2004, it was the first time Georgia Tech had gotten that far in NCAA Division I basketball. And sports, as I said, in the Southeast is it's unbelievable in terms of how, especially college sports, how people get behind it. In the Northeast, we're more pro sports fans. I remember the New York Islanders winning 4 Stanley Cups from 80 to 84. I remember the last Knicks championship in 1973. And Mel, I got to tell you, you played Michael Jordan highlights. I'm not a big Michael Jordan guy because he tormented my Knicks for a lot of years. So I had a chance to meet him. And, most people run up and ask for his autograph. I had to tell him, I said, listen, you made my middle years there really miserable watching you beat my Knicks all the time. So I almost clicked off when you played the Jordan highlights. But anyway, sports, like I said, for one way or another, it has a way of really uniting a community. And the Atlanta community was interested when we went to the Final Four, how everybody got behind us, even people who went to other schools, Georgia State, University of Georgia. I'd go through the Atlanta airport and people would come up and congratulate me and talk about how much fun it was. Even to this day, my wife and I were huge tennis fans, and we went to the US Open, and I ran into a guy who came up to me and he introduced his son to me. And he said, Coach, I got to tell you, he goes, my son was born the weekend before you guys played the championship game. And I can remember holding him watching the championship game when you guys played the University of Connecticut. And so, again, sports has this way of creating great memories, uniting, and really bringing people together. The best example of the bond and the togetherness that sports can create, to me, goes back to 1995. South Africa was hosting the Rugby World Cup. And there's a movie that chronicles this time called Invictus. And Nelson Mandela had been released from prison in, I believe it was February of 1990. And then he was elected president of the country, the newly formed country, if you will, where they did away with, they abolished apartheid in 1994. And in 94, he went to a rugby match where the Springboks, the rugby team, this national rugby team of South Africa, was playing against England. And he sat in the stands and he watched the white South Africans cheering for Springboks and he watched the Black South Africans rooting for England. And he thought to himself, we need to find a way to bring our country together. He didn't think that was right, that the Black South Africans were cheering against their own country. You have to understand the Springboks team at that time was a symbol of white supremacy. They were, just big, rugged guys, and the white government structure supported them, and they didn't provide. There weren't many opportunities for Black South Africans to play for the Springboks. But Mandela saw this and thought, I've got to bring our country together, and we're going to do it through sports. And I'll play this video, and I'll finish my thoughts here.
Congratulations to the Springboks, the Bokke, Amapogopogo. You helped unite our nation as only sport can do by winning the Rugby World Cup in 1995. You made us all proud of being South Africans.
And during the Rugby World Cup, my phone would ring, my mobile phone, it would be Madiba, wanting to chat to me, to find out, what's happening, is the team focused, are they okay? And when we walked out of the stadium, the sounds of Madiba, Nelson, 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 reverberating around that stadium was just, it's very powerful.
You stepped forward again, this time winning the World Cup away from home. And when you won a test match at a venue where we have never won in the entire history of South African rugby, once more you reminded the nation that we are one people with one destiny. We have overcome much in order to be where we are. You, our national team, represent that spirit. You have done us exceedingly proud thus far. Play the game hard and honestly, and whatever the outcome, hold your heads high. Thank you all, and may South African rugby continue to grow in the way it is doing.
So, again, to me, there's no greater force to unite people, to create empathy amongst each other, mutual respect than sports. And again, I don't care, what sport it is. As I was preparing this, I looked at your website and I came across the quote at the top of your website. And to me, this sports talks about ethical development, but it really relates to becoming a great teammate. It says to care for one another, care for anyone else enough to make their problems one's own is ever the beginning of one's real ethical development. And when I read that as I get ready to prepare for my season, I am going to paraphrase that and talk about that quote with my team, because it's also, to me, it's a statement that tells you you're becoming a great teammate. And again, I believe sports has always set the example, but all it can do is set the example for people to follow. I look at, in particular, our country today, and it's not a real insightful thing to say that we're divided. And there are people out there who prey on that division. But most of those people, I can honestly say, never were involved in team sports or in sports, period. Because if you are involved in sports like Eric or myself, or my brother or Anthony or Woody, all the guys we used to hang out, whether we were going down to Powers Lane School and playing pickup, or playing stickball, pickup basketball or stickball, or going to a baseball game together and having a mutual interest in rooting for our team, regardless of your beliefs or what you believe in, you're always going to try to see the other person's side of it, because being a great teammate is about seeing the other person's point of view and understanding and learning from that person's point of view. And so while it's easy to to point out, especially at the highest level where the money is the greatest, point out the unethical behavior of what's going on in the sports world. When you get below the surface, you get below the highest level, and even at the highest level, you have some of the most motivating, most inspiring people and most inspiring acts that we can find anywhere in our world, anywhere in society. Again, I'm going to close it with that. I really, really appreciate this opportunity to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, and that's the power of sports in society and the impact it has on society. And I'd be more than willing to take questions when the time is appropriate.